So good evening, everyone. Good morning to the Australians. Thank you
Good
for
morning.
joining. Today's Green Shakti talk is by donation and will benefit Annadanam, which literally translates to sacred offering of food. It's a perfect purpose chosen by our guest of honor, Ronni Kahn, a cause close to her heart and soul. Sri Shakti Amma Narayani founded Sri Narayani Peetham in 1995. And for those of you unfamiliar, it is a spiritual, educational, cultural, and health complex in Tamil Nadu in southern India. In temples around India, food is offered at no charge to devotees or guests visiting the temple. COVID-19 has had a huge impact, a detrimental impact on the world, and people are hungry. And due to government regulations, Peetham has been closed for many months. Normal revenue streams have ceased, and many programs are curtailed or reduced. So this community is in a struggle to survive. And of course, unfortunately, the poorest of the poor are disproportionately affected. So we're doing all we can to raise money to keep vital programs funded until restrictions are properly and permanently lifted and visitors resume bringing in critical sources of revenue. So I will make sure to put the link for donations in the chat box later in the conversation. And we will leave some time for questions. So please bring your burning questions to the table. And with that, it is my great pleasure to introduce Ronni Kahn. Ronni is a trailblazer. She's the CEO and founder of Oz Harvest. And she has made rescuing food sexy. She was born in Johannesburg, South Africa. She emigrated to Israel in 1970 and then to Australia in 1988. In 1994, she founded event planning business Ronni Kahn Event Designs. In 2004, Ronni founded the food rescue charity Oz Harvest, which we will be talking quite a bit about tonight, and was instrumental in changing legislation that had prevented potential food donors from donating their excess food. So Ronni has numerous awards. I'm just going to name a few because we'll be here all night. But in 2010, Ronni was named Australia's local hero at the Australian of the Year Awards. And in 2012, she was awarded the Tribute Award for Innovation, Entrepreneurial Skill and Contribution to the Community at the Veuve Clicquot Businesswoman Award, and was also featured in the landmark project called 200 Women. If I may, I'd like to introduce a little bit about Oz Harvest, because Oz Harvest, for those of you that don't know, is Australia's leading food rescue organization. It collects quality, excess food from commercial outlets, delivers it directly to more than 1,300 charities, supporting people in need across the country. After noticing the huge volume of good food going to waste from the hospitality industry in which Ronni was steeped, she decided there had to be a better way. And she started in Sydney with one van. She delivered 4,000 meals in the first month. Now, Oz Harvest operates nationally, rescuing over 180 tons of food each week from over 3,500 food donors, including supermarkets, hotels, airports, wholesalers, farmers, corporate events, catering companies, etc. They recently opened Australia's first rescued food supermarket, the Oz Harvest Market. That is in Sydney, and it's based on, quote, take what you need, give if you can philosophy. So fast forward, and Oz Harvest has 220 staff members nationally, of which 120 are drivers, a fleet of more than 60 vehicles, It takes $20 million a year to run this national organization, and they are funded completely philanthropically. They also run many different educational programs such as NEST, nutrition education, sustenance training, Nourish, Feast, food education and sustainability training, and cooking for a cause, to ensure that they teach how to minimize food waste and create change makers in the community. So there is much more to say, but I thought maybe we'd stop there. Otherwise, I'll be speaking for an hour. So Ronni, welcome. The last time I saw you was the beginning of 2020. It was pre-COVID, India at Petum. And before that, I still fondly recall our Lower East Side brunch in New York City a few years ago.
Totally.
Today, we are discussing A Repurposed Life, a memoir that was co-authored by Jessica Chapnick Kahn. Thank you, Ronni, for being with us today.
Thank you so very much. And I'd like to begin. In Australia, the way we begin talks is acknowledging that we meet on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. This is our the indigenous custodians of this land. And we pay our deep respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. And so I welcome all of you and acknowledge wherever it is that I meet you on today. And it is such a privilege and such a treat to be talking and knowing that if we raise any funds, it goes towards Anadanam and to Amma and to really the most important guiding light for me from the time that I started Oz Harvest, because I had just started Oz Harvest when I met Amma.
That's beautiful. And we'll talk a little bit about that. Ronni, if you are up to it, I wanted to start this talk with a video.
Sure.
Okay, so just give me
I'm
one.
not sure which one you're going to show, but what are you showing? I might die.
You won't die. This is out in the public domain. So hold on just a moment.
You're going to show the monologue, aren't you?
Oh, it's a good one. It's a very moving one. And I think it'll set the tone for our talk today.
Sometimes, at the end of the day, I wonder what my mother would think about my life if she was alive now. I wonder if I'm living out some of the dreams she never allowed herself to dream. The truth is, I'm living a life I really never imagined possible. I never imagined living a life beyond surviving, beyond making money and my own pleasure. I never imagined anything beyond happy. But the day came when I asked myself the question, is this life of mine good for me? And is it doing good for others? All I can really say for sure is the day I really started questioning what was meaningful for me, everything changed. Never in my life was I considered the capable one. Never was I considered funny or popular. I was never academic. I was not particularly smart. Never was I considered beautiful. I wasn't the one with a personality or talent. So if a person like me, a person missing so many ingredients in the recipe for making a difference, can do something, then anyone can. This is me, Ronni Kahn, standing before you in my naked truth. This is the story of a repurposed life.
Wow. That is really incredible, quite monumental. And now you understand why I wanted to start us off with this video. You know, I finished your memoir, Ronni, in one sitting. It is beautifully written. It is dynamic and vulnerable. And it offers so much insight into leadership and uncovering what you call one's soul's gifts. We all have them, and becoming acquainted with them in an honest and pure way is essentially the win. That's the life prize. So I wonder if we can open this up with a question to you. Can you talk about how you define soul gifts? I just loved that term in the book.
Thank you. You know, I'm so utterly convinced and understand that I am a vessel for what it is that I do. That, I suppose, in its essence is what I mean by soul gifts. I clearly have gifts that I never knew were there growing up, and I never knew were there really until I redefined my life. And that gift is to, in a way, inspire others to trust me enough to believe that I can deliver what it is that I say I'll do. And that gift is just the thing that I'm called on to use, and to use for good. And in my case, it's to use to make sure, it started off to make sure that good food didn't go to waste and that we fed people. But now, of course, it's about systems change, and it's about the levers that it's going to take. I never set up Oz Harvest to be the biggest food rescue organization in the world, nor did I ever set it up to win any awards or to, all I want to do is actually solve the problem. And the problem is there's too much good food going to waste, and there are too many people who are hungry. And those are the two things that I balance every day. And so my gift is I've been gifted this job to bring this knowledge, this information, and the change in the world to make that happen.
So when I read the preface to your book, I knew it would be a page turner. And you start it off with reflection about your relationship. It was a relationship of 7 years that failed. And it served as an essential turning point for you.
Yeah.
It was a moment, and if I can quote you, you said, with every book, CD, and tie that I hurled into a box, I let myself feel how badly I wanted more from my life. And I wanted it now. I'd squandered a lot of time, but I was finally free to be the person I wanted to be, not the person I had been. And I just thought it was interesting how there are these critical moments in life, in each of our lives, when we feel the most flattened, the most despair, and it allows for reflection and contemplation, and it creates momentum for change. And it's that moment that we dream with every cell, how do we move beyond survival into freedom and our real purpose? And it seems to me this must have been one of those moments for you to begin to think about a purpose-filled life.
Yeah, when you live a vacuous life, there's not that much, then there's no lower you can go, it would seem, or so it felt to me. I think the interesting thing, and it's really all those turning points in one's lives, and it's also the moments, one of the biggest clues I say to people, because nowadays people do come to me because they want answers. And in a way, that's why we wrote the book. And I will happily share about, it's Jessie who actually wrote the book. She listened to me. She transcribed what our conversations were. And then she managed to capture my voice and put that into words. But one of the things that is a constant thread, and I'm reminding people so often, I mean, one of the triggers for me for starting Oz Harvest was the fact that I had a problem in my business life. Every single one of my events had food left over. Now, it took me a long time to connect that actually just throwing that food away was not so cool. But when I reached that point, I needed a solution for my problem. Now, so often somebody will say, why doesn't somebody solve this, and walk away until somebody else solves it? And in my case, I was the blessed one. I was the gifted one to say, actually, I've got a problem and I'm going to find the solution. And all of that confluence and convergence happened after I managed to extricate myself from that extraordinarily intoxicating relationship, because I was bought for a period, and I'd never had material luxuries before. I'd never bought anything not on a sale or wholesale or at a market. And suddenly this world of opulence was open to me, and it was very, it's a bit like, I love when Amma says, the golden temple attracts people because the gold is shiny and we come for the gold. And then you learn the messages once you're there. And in a way, it took me a while I bought into that gold without the messages until I managed to get the message. And it was painful and challenging.
Yep. One of the quotes that you use from Sri Shakti Amma is that all of us are blessed with capabilities and skills, but it is how we utilize them for the benefit of mankind, which is most important. And throughout your memoir, you ask yourself this question, is this life of mine good for me, but is it doing good for others?
Yeah. And I do think that's fundamental, because that's where so many people get stuck. In my mentoring world, I have people come to me, and really oftentimes what they're wanting is, they've either looked at me or they think, wow, there's Ronni and she's won these awards and she's on magazines, whatever. And they want that. But actually, it's the doing that, all of that is just purely incidental and is useful. I mean, I am the first person to say that it is very helpful to create awareness around an organization when it's elevated all the time. But it's actually the purpose and the culture of Oz Harvest which enables and is the reason that we win these awards. But it's to the people who come to me that I really need to say, what is it? What is it you can do? You don't have to start a charity. You don't have to go out and build anything. Just look around and see where the need is and see what you can do. And it's as small as helping someone in your office or someone in your inner circle, to the bigger and the ripple effect of doing bigger things. And, I'm really, I am so humbled to be on this call today, because I am talking to people who literally believe and live and are Amma devotees in so many ways, that every single one of you know more than me what it is to believe in doing good. So
Yeah.
it's interesting. I don't normally have such a wonderful opportunity to acknowledge and say I'm literally preaching to the converted, because every single one of us knows the richness of giving our time, our energy, and of course also our money if we have that to give.
So I was really interested in how the book was organized. So it was organized into 3 geographical headings, and then followed by Oz Harvest and True Calling. I loved those headings. And I thought we'd talk a little bit, Ronni, about your early beginnings in South Africa. Your grandparents were from Europe. You grew up in South Africa, but you had a lot of really interesting early role models and
Yeah.
and certainly fascinating, enterprising, and very strong women. So
Yeah.
there was Flory, right? The nanny that showed you unconditional love. There were your sisters, your older sisters, Margie and Pam, that showed you faith and conviction. Your mother, when your father's accident took place, you
My
saw
mother, the first entrepreneur that
the
I ever
first
came in contact with
entrepreneur.
without even knowing that word. But all I knew
Absolutely.
was innovation, resilience, and strength. Yeah.
Absolutely. And no nonsense and positive, and making the best of every situation. And I think it's that resiliency that you've inherited that we see woven throughout the memoir. It's the attitude, which is so important. And your father too, right? Against all odds, after breaking his body, he taught himself to walk again. So, and a lot of it is done seemingly matter-of-factly, humbly, as you are today, and as you are humble throughout the memoir. There's a line where you say that your father made a deep choice about how he was going to live his life and how he was going, to deal with physical pain. And even in unexpected situations, he taught you to look towards what is life-giving, right? He taught you the gratitude of being grateful for every moment that you're alive, that nothing should be squandered. And at his eulogy, you had an interesting epiphany. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Totally. And I think it's so relevant because I think one of the key messages, and I will talk specifically about that, but one of the key messages I share now with people is don't ever underestimate your own actions and the subliminal bearing it has on those around you. Because as a child, I didn't understand or know that my mother was showing resilience. All I saw was a woman, my mother, smiled and gave us love. It was only obviously in hindsight, understanding and thinking what she'd gone through and how did she do that. And so same with my father. I mean, he came out with one stiff leg, one leg in a caliper. He never saw himself as a victim, but I never thought of that. I never thought of him as disabled. And it was literally only at his eulogy that I thought, when I could picture him climbing up a ladder. He was an architect and he would go onto building sites. And, my heart would lurch if I went with him and he'd climb up a ladder, but I didn't even understand why it was lurching or why I thought, he just found his way up that ladder and down, and everyone around just took it for granted that he could do that. But in fact, he was told he'd never walk again. And so really that living example of someone who himself never saw himself as a victim, never thought of himself as disabled, so nobody else around him did. But in fact, he was severely disabled. He couldn't run, he couldn't play rugby ever again. He couldn't do any of those sports that he had
loved.
loved.
So an interesting theme is one of self-worth. It's a
Yeah.
big theme. And I think so many in the world struggle with self-worth. And through your teenage years, you struggled and had this sense of limitation, right? These undercurrents of limitation that so many people internalize. And there's one quote that I really admired when you made that connection, and you said, it is no accident that my life's work is about scarcity, abundance, and redistribution.
Yeah. Yeah. Because for me, the notion and learning that in fact I was surrounded by abundance, but within I'd always felt lacking.
Mm.
And the interesting thing is, it doesn't always manifest. So of some of the people who know me and read that book and said, what are you talking about? What do you mean you thought that you were insecure, or that the words you said weren't worth hearing?
Mm.
That's how it felt to me. But perhaps there were people who did not know that. And, it's that difference between our own self-worth, how we project, and sometimes there's such a dichotomy between what we feel and how we present. And it's when it all comes into alignment. It's when you can bring every part of you, your whole self, to whatever it is you're doing, whether it's a relationship or whether it's the work that you do, that you don't have to leave anything behind when you open the door.
Mm.
That you're bringing only a part of yourself. And I didn't know that I was doing that. I didn't know I was really compartmentalizing until I just gelled and it all came together in this exquisite way through giving.
What's so triumphant, Ronni, and why I swallowed the memoir whole is because ultimately it's so much also about self-realization, true self-realization, which is, as you've noted, the highest form of healing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I meet people who are swallowing books on ethics, swallowing books on values, looking to their left and looking at that person, and looking to their right and looking at that person, and imbibing. And all you want to do is say, look in the mirror and just be who you are. Think about, what is it when you were a child that brought you joy and bliss? And what is it today that can fill your soul? And generally we find that it's how we work with others and what it is we bring to others. And it's not something that you can buy off a shelf.
Mm.
And in today's world of commodity, people just wish they could just go out and buy a bunch of purpose, put it on, and their lives will be redesigned. And it's got to come from inside, and it's that alignment, and that's the exciting thing. And in so many ways, the simplicity of Amma, the core message, just go out and serve, just go out and do good. That's ultimately what I'm saying to people. Go
Mm.
out and do good for others, because therein is the biggest gift. Therein lie the riches that we all search for.
It's interesting because you had a very strong foundation, Jewish values. And that's an interesting topic that I'd love to touch upon,
Yeah.
because really this idea of tikkun olam, and for those unfamiliar, it's the literal translation is repairing the world. It comes from Jewish theology, and it's a very important aspect of Judaism, that we are called to make the world more just, more peaceful, more tolerant, equal. And we do that through acts of charity, through kindness, political action. And this tikkun olam, this repairing the world, it is just essential to create a just and ethical society. And this really is a central tenet of your identity.
But in fact, if you think about it, every single religion, it's true. It is the central tenet of the Jewish values, and values that I imbibed, because again, we never know when we imbibe values by how they lived, not by how they spoken. And that is such a huge thing today, and one of the biggest challenges with leadership. You can talk about values all you like, but if you're not living a value-led, inspired life, then it's very hard to be considered a great leader. But every religion, I mean, Jesus was the ultimate in humility and giving. He existed, and he is that metaphor again for the spirit within all of us. So in every religion, whether in ours we call it, it's our duty to repair the world. But, Jesus went out and has the same message as Amma, has the same message as Islam. Fundamentally, somewhere along the way, it's us as humans that seems to have screwed up the message and made it work or not work according to warped values, or values that we have seem to have twisted in order to get personal gain.
So you grew up in apartheid South Africa, and we touched upon a few of the people who were role models for you.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear about what it was like for you to grow up in apartheid South Africa. And you have a chapter in your memoir about Nelson Mandela. And again, in terms of role models, I'd love to hear about the impact he had on your life.
Well, I mean, to me, actually, he is the ultimate leader and the ultimate role model, both for what he had to go through, the forgiveness he showed, and the leadership and the people he inspired. But if we go back to South Africa, because whilst there's absolutely segregation, racism in every one of the countries we all live in, when you have enforced racism, when that is the law, it is quite impossible to imagine what it could be like to live under that. So there's overt, there's covert. Often, and most of us now experience racism that is incredibly dangerous. But when you have it enshrined in law, that people, by virtue of the color of their skin, cannot enter the same door as you, cannot hold the same jobs as you, what it does to a people and what it does to the culture of a country is just quite extraordinary. And the ramifications of that for South Africa will continue a couple of generations until that abundance and scarcity gets worked through, and until generations of people whose grandparents did not live under apartheid. I, even going back to South Africa today, meeting some Black older generation people, older than me, who'd turn around and say, "Hello, madam," and I'd say, "My name is Ronni, what is yours?" It's so enshrined in that culture. And so growing up in that, one could just accept it. If you were white and born privileged, how many millions of privileged people accept that privilege and abuse it and use it? I was very fortunate in that my parents, who were not brave and courageous enough to fight it, because to fight that system in South Africa meant you probably landed up in jail, or at worst you were watched, your life was made a misery. My parents didn't fight that. They certainly taught us morality and values, but our neighbors did. And Selma, who
Yeah,
was my other
great
amazing,
role model. Yeah.
critical role model, who's now 94 and still the most divine mentor. I call her, she's still in South Africa. And she says, I can't talk now. I'm on a webinar, or I've just learned how to do this and this on the computer. She's 94. She's never exercised in her life. She's never done a diet. She lives with a bag of chocolate in her bag. And she is vital and alive and still active and still trying so much to do for the world, and thinks that she's failed, given, that she hasn't done enough. And she, from getting electricity into Soweto, but always being a fighter and an apartheid warrior, anti-apartheid warrior and role model. So, we all have our demons.
Yes, but her diet sounds great. I need her number.
Exactly.
When you finish high school, you're ready to go to college, to university, and you fly to Israel. And you land in Israel. And there's this wonderful bit about how you are on your own. It's really the first time that you're independent.
I've never been on an airplane.
You've never been on an airplane.
Really left my parents for longer.
Yeah, and even making your own bed was a bit of an effort, that it was a new experience, but it was a good adventure. So you were making your own decisions, but you didn't know how to cook, right? So I really loved, because it brought me back in time when you said that you would write letters to your mother to say, how do you make this, or how do you make that, and how do you roast potatoes?
And I literally found the aerogram. This week I was looking for something. Jessie and I wrote the book. I couldn't find anything. I had nothing. She would get so frustrated from me. She'd say, don't you have? And I'd say nothing. I cleaned out my cupboard last week and found in handwriting, because an aerogram is how we communicated. Obviously, there was nothing. It would take 2 to 3 weeks between letters coming and going. And I found this aerogram with my mother's handwriting saying, I can't believe you never learned while you lived at home how to roast potatoes, but here's how you do it.
Which is wonderful, because I mean, in the world of instant messaging and email and texting, it's, you'd have to wait a few weeks before you roasted those potatoes until the airmail letter arrived.
I did starve for the first few weeks in Israel, because my mother had spoiled me, as she was this wondrous cook. People would come to her for dinners and she would create these gorgeous exotic meals. And the only thing I'd eat was a chocolate bar, a particular chocolate bar, or hamburgers and chips. And she'd call my friends and say, Ronni doesn't eat very much if she's coming to you for lunch. Can you imagine if we did that today for our children? Talk about helicopter parenting. I don't know how she got away with it. And afterwards, after I learned to eat all this food, I said, why didn't you make me? She said, yeah, really? Like I didn't try?
I love that. So you get to Israel, and actually you join a kibbutz, right? And a kibbutz is communal living that's really based on utopian ideas of socialism, working the land, supporting the establishment of the country. It's
the security of
equality. Yeah.
Yeah, well, there was a basic inequality which I discovered along the way. I went there because Des, my first husband, had joined this idealistic socialist group who had chosen to go and live there. And once we chose to be an item and to commit to each other, it was easiest for me to go and live there. And I totally, from a male point of view, there were these Western young men who arrived and were given big boys' toys like combines and tractors and plows, and they felt like the absolute idealistic pioneers. And I was told, go and work with the kids and wash out and do the laundry and do the linen. And I didn't like that very much.
I love when in the memoir you write that you discovered pretty quickly that you weren't such a great socialist.
I believe in it, but being told by someone that this is what they need me to do was not an easy task. I lived there for 10 years and it was extraordinary and I loved the community. But I didn't realize how independently minded I was and that I didn't want to be told what to do.
But at the very heart of it, Ronni, it really, nonetheless, in its purest, in its best form, this idea of creating, equality, a just society, making sure that everyone has enough, this idea of sharing resources is something that you've carried through, to everything that you've done in your life.
Yeah, unwittingly, without even realizing. And even when I started Oz Harvest, one of the things my mother had done in order to make a living had been to bake these cakes. And I was the youngest and I had to help her pack the car. And because I was the youngest, I was the one who had to go with her to do the deliveries. And I was just a spoiled little girl. And I used to moan and groan, why me? And yes, I'll come. And of course I went because I didn't have a choice. So, for all those people who thought that Ronni was the charity queen from the time she was a child, that was her aspiration. It certainly wasn't. And I didn't behave like that until it all came together. But it suddenly dawned on me that, in fact, my food distribution life started when I helped my mother distribute her cakes.
But what you do love are challenges.
No doubt.
And you're not afraid of them. So I think what's so inspiring is that when you're given a challenge, when you're given that opportunity, and it has to test you, right? It has to test your resilience and push you in different directions to be independent, to face your limitations. That's when you really rise to the occasion. And I think that having that type of will and personality is really what has helped you create such a successful organization.
Well, I often say that I think it was just naivety. It didn't occur to me that it could fail because it made so much sense. And because I had run a business, and seriously, running a charity is about as furthest thing you could think of from running a business. Because running a business, you're in charge of how you get your money and you're in charge of what you do with it. And suddenly you start an organization and you're using other people's money and you're under 24-hour scrutiny to make sure. And in a way, that's actually what's so exciting. It's this use of other people's money to make sure that you're giving the very best value. But because I didn't know if it would be, it didn't occur to me that it would be hard. And it didn't occur to me that those hardships were things that would be reasons to not do what I do. So I just jumped in. And when people said it might be hard or you can't do this, I just said, mind out my way, because this is what I'm doing. What do you mean? And so in a way, to be so passionate about something. And this is another little clue that passion drives us in a way. And it's inspiring. Passion is inspiring because so many people walk around half dead. So many people walk around with an inability to either make up their minds around what it is they should be, could be, want to be, or they put it off for another part of their lives.
They're waiting for the right moment, whatever that right moment.
After my mother died young. And that was like, again, a call to action, and said, oh, no waiting till you've saved all the money you need. You just get on with life and do it now. And then again, if I needed another reminder of any reason to live every single day like it's your best and your very last and your very only day, was, of course, with our beloved Joe, who in 8 weeks went from the gorgeousness that we all know to leaving us with her exquisiteness,
Right.
and the gift of her voice and the gift of who she was. But, you know,
For those of you who are not familiar, Ronni is speaking of her son Ido's first wife, and they
I mean, Joe and Ido, they were vegetarian yogis. I mean, lived, you know, all the things that we think are going to ensure
right.
the longevity of a long life. And again, we have to understand karma, and we have to understand that our gift is for now. It's not for the future. It's to use. And she used hers absolutely to the max. But, you know, she left us at 36. And
Yeah.
that again was enough inspiration for me to say, this is all I have is right now. And I want to look in that mirror and know who I am and what I'm here for and what I can do for others.
If we look at the seeds of Oz harvest, at this point, you've left Israel, you're now living in Australia.
Yeah.
You're running a successful event business, right, for about 17 years. And you have this incredible and simple realization that there is beautiful food that's going to waste, and what can be done about it. And you realize that it just turns out that a lot of people had this very same problem, that it was this food was going straight to the trash, and no one realized that there was another alternative.
Yeah, as I say, there definitely were a few people who came and said, I tried that and it didn't work, and you can't do that. And that's obviously why later down the track, not that much long after, I had laws changed to allow this to happen. But when I realized the scale of the problem, because I didn't in the beginning, I thought it was just my problem. And then it, 17 years ago, climate change, this notion that food waste is the third biggest reason for climate warming, we didn't know that then, really. I mean, it didn't take long for me to realize the numbers and then start putting all of this together. But at the time when I actually started rescuing food and being a rogue food rescuer before I chose to do this, we didn't, it wasn't that apparent how important it was to do.
I think it's such an important lesson, Ronni. I think about this a lot. What is a successful entrepreneur? And ultimately, you start small, you see the problem, there's a gap, but you're solving for a concrete problem. And you do it with what's called the right agenda. And that's something you talk about in the memoir, meaning it's not an ego-driven exercise. This is, again, going back to this Tikkun Olam theme. This is very much about repairing the world. And I wonder if you could walk us through the moment when you went back to South Africa after many years and you visited Soweto, which is a township outside of Johannesburg. And really, it was that moment back with your mentor, Selma Broad, where you felt galvanized.
Well, galvanizing, it's that call to action, and each and every one of us often think things things mull in our minds, and then sometimes something, a light goes off to allow that to happen. And that is what happened with me. I chose to go back to South Africa for a visit. I hadn't been back since Mandela had been released. My family had all left by then. I just had this family who were our very close neighbors and had stayed friends with us. I didn't know the extent of their actions. I didn't know, I knew that to stay in South Africa, you'd have to either have been active or very much under the radar. And they had been active, but I didn't know the details. And I said to Selma, I'm coming back. And she said, great, you're going to be there for these few days and we're going to go and visit Soweto. Now, in my childhood, Soweto was a very fearful place. It had all of the residents, all the Black inhabitants of Johannesburg that were not allowed to live in the city were, if you think about a ghetto in terms of siloing a nation, a population, that's what Soweto was. It was shanty town, houses cobbled together with corrugated iron. And in our childhood, no white person would go there because it wasn't safe. And it was filled with crime. And these were people who literally were working hand to foot or at the behest of white employers, and their lives were severely challenged. And now here I am 30 years later, and Selma says, we're going to go and visit Soweto. And I'm thinking, holy shit, I don't want to go to that place because it's scary. And I don't say that, but she just says, yeah, that's what we're going to do. And we drive, and she knows exactly how to get there. And in my mind, it was like, a momentous journey, and it's like 5 minutes to get there. But my childhood size and scope. And as we drive into Soweto, and I went to South Africa because I'd been thinking about my purpose and how I'd broken up that relationship. And I'd started rogue rescuing food, but certainly hadn't considered doing anything momentous with it. And Selma, as we drive into Soweto, says, I was under her breath, like just matter of fact. And in fact, I wasn't even sure why we were going to Soweto, but it was because she had set up clinics to teach women about AIDS. She's a radiologist. And at the time in South Africa, all this misinformation about how you got AIDS. And she says, yeah, I was responsible for electricity in Soweto.
Wow.
Now it's a city of thriving millions of people. And I heard that, and all I could think of, the hair on my arm stood up, and still does every time I think about that. And all I could think of is, I want to know what that feels like. I want to know what it feels like to have made that difference to that many people. And in a way that was that, Jessie put it so exquisitely that a light bulb went off in my head when Selma spoke about electricity, in that I knew that my life would never be the same again. And that's when I thought, I've got a problem and I've got a solution. So that's my role. And, when you find your calling, and there's absolutely no doubt that feeding people and advocating and lobbying and is my calling. And I didn't know that until then. And I found my calling.
So Oz Harvest, you come back from South Africa, you're absolutely electrified and ready to make an impact. You found your calling. You get everyone together, person to person to person, who eventually would help you in every aspect of this organization. And I think it's really important, Ronni, if you would touch upon the Civil Liabilities Act. This is really fascinating, and how instrumental you were in changing the law at the time, because you could give away food, but you would be liable if.
Well, it wasn't even that. It's just that some people gave me food, but suddenly when I started realizing the scope of the problem, and some people said, well, actually, we'd love to give you the food, but there's no way because we're worried about our own liability. And I thought that doesn't make sense. How do we make it so that they can give away their food without worrying that they're going to be liable? And
Right.
so it's based on the Good Samaritan Act, that notion that if you give in good faith, that therefore you are not liable. And so I found a bunch of lawyers who took it on pro bono and lobbied, and together we lobbied and then had that law changed in 4 states in Australia, and the rest just followed suit. Yeah.
So some years later, you have another incredibly brilliant idea, and you create the first free supermarket in Australia. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Really in the world. I mean, I don't like, it's not about the scope, but really the reason, food has been given away for eons, but oftentimes you have to register, you have to have a coupon, you can take only 2 this, or, and it doesn't look like a supermarket. There's something undignified or disrespectful with all the best intention about going to a charitable op shop or institution to get services. And what I wanted was to destigmatize and make it possible to create a space that anybody could come to and feel respectful and respected and get produce and leave as if they'd been to a supermarket, just not pay for it. And so somebody gave, as they do, people give me spaces, and people seem to just really love to be pushed. And so I got this space and we created, it looks like a little supermarket. In fact, our second one's just opened.
Amazing.
And that one, which was given to me for a year and it's now 3 years later, we are having to give back because we got it while they were waiting for the development application, and it's going to be turned into very, very expensive apartments.
Mm.
The buildings will be knocked down, but we've now got a new one that's ours for the next 5 years, and it looks like a little supermarket. And the challenge is that in post-COVID, people who never thought they'd need food coming to the supermarket.
Right. Yes.
And to all the other ways that we're giving food. In many different ways. We pivoted and were very agile through COVID and created so many new programs that it's very, very exciting.
And I think what's extraordinary about the supermarket is, if I understood correctly, outside of the supermarket manager, the whole market is staffed by volunteers. Is that still the case?
Yeah, it's so beautiful.
That's
I popped
extraordinary.
my head in yesterday, and the thing is that those people come to me and are on their knees thanking me for the opportunity to do this. It's a beautiful thing when volunteering works and people feel valued. And that's when I say we all can find something to do. It doesn't have to be starting a charity. It can be supporting existing ideas, unless if you've got something that's new and going to solve a problem, go for it. Absolutely. But support existing, because that is as valuable. I have over 3,500 volunteers, and we couldn't do what we do if we didn't have those people.
And I understand that people are reaching out, from 50 different countries, essentially to replicate this model.
Yeah.
So it's quite a revolution.
Yeah, I mean, the beautiful thing is we have opened there is South Africa Harvest, and they've very excitedly shared with me this week that they'd delivered their 3.5 millionth meal, and that's really just through COVID. And there are 19 million people in South Africa who need food. The scale of the problem. And we're in the UK, we're in New Zealand, but we've shared our model with numerous countries. Yeah.
So I encourage everyone, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. We have a few minutes left.
Yeah.
And I would love to conclude with the story about Amos Oz that really concludes the memoir in many ways. You made a speech about him. He's an Israeli writer, and you made a speech when he died, after he died in 2018. And I'm just going to read a bit of the memoir because it's so moving, and maybe you can comment on it. So
share that story very briefly without you reading it, if you
no,
like.
please do. Super.
So the way, it's a quote from Amos Oz, and I'll share the quote because it's like I'm giving permission to people. So I'll share it with you very briefly.
Wonderful.
So the way the quote goes, and it's almost word for word, it says, in the event of a huge conflagration, like a fire, we as human beings all have three principal options of ways that we can behave. Number one, we can look at that fire and we can run away as fast as we can and leave those that cannot run to burn. That is an option. Number two, we can write an angry letter to the newspaper demanding that those responsible be punished. Or number three, we can run and find a bucket. And if you cannot find a bucket, hold on, because I'm unprepared. Give me 1 second for the last line. 1 second.
Well, this is a good moment for everyone to write in their questions.
I'm back.
Welcome back.
And if you can't, you run and find a bucket. And if you don't have a bucket, find a jug. And if you can't find a jug, each and every one of us can find a teaspoon, because we have a teaspoon. And yes, I know a teaspoon is tiny and the fire is huge, but there are millions of us. And if we all use our teaspoon every single day, we too can put out the fires. And so I invite you all to become a member of the Order of the Teaspoon, where you either wear a teaspoon on your lapel, or if you look in my ear,
oh, that's super.
So that you are reminded to use your teaspoon. And what I do, can all of you do this? Put your hands together like this. Now look into your hands, because in our hand is this metaphorical teaspoon. And could you please take your teaspoon and could you put it in your heart and use your teaspoon every day?
Oh.
Now, I know that each and every one of you use your whole dinner service every day, but that is the story that I chose to end the book with. And I have people leaping up to get teaspoons, people writing to me to share how they use their teaspoon every day. So it's a very beautiful analogy for taking action.
Ronni, we have a question about if you could speak more about the fine line between embracing our self-worth and also remaining humble. Is Sarah saying that she has seen that you've mastered this and would love to hear?
It's not about me. Nothing of this is about me. I am a vessel. I am Amma's vessel. All I am is the deliverer of the service. People can say, I mean, you know, you saw that video when Jessie said I needed to do that video. Far out.
It was extraordinary. I'm so glad she did it.
And then again, I just realized if that is my job to dismantle myself, that is my job. And so it really, I think it is the ultimate of surrender. I am here for a purpose, and that purpose is to make a difference.
Ronni, one more question we have from Ching. She's in the middle of organizing a mantra class series in China to raise money for a school children fees. And sometimes she gets in her head about how much she wants to raise. So the question is, what's your advice on detaching from the outcome and just serving?
I think we have to differentiate. To set a goal as to how much money you want to raise is really important, because that allows people, that measurement is very important. To say, I want to raise $5,000, 500,000, whatever it is. That is not being attached or detached. That is making a commitment. It's about the impact, and the impact is what drives income. That sentence is hugely important. So when you can quantify the impact, so if you turn around and said, our goal is to raise or deliver 1 million meals, and in order to deliver 1 million meals, we need $20,000 or $100,000. That's the message. Now, there will be those who want to participate and those who don't. That's where you are detached. You cannot convince anybody to join, but all you can share is the reason you're doing this. It's not about you. It's because you have a bigger vision, and the vision is this class, this mantra is going to feed those people. Join the opportunity. It's an opportunity for you, individual, to participate and be part of this.
Thank you, Ronni. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. I want to say that I'm so grateful. I'm thanking you for making such a huge impact on the world and inspiring all of us to really discover our own soul gifts, so that we continue to dream, so that we continue to feel excited and find our nobility and purpose. And there's one quote from the memoir I'd love to end with, where you say, what has slowly become clearer and clearer is that no one can truly succeed alone. The joy is in getting there together. The joy is in realizing that we are all made from the same stuff, that we are tied together, and that our suffering is collective, as is our joy.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm so grateful and joyful to share this time with all of you, and that you've chosen to spend this time with me, talking to me.
Thank you so much. This was extraordinarily special on so many levels. Thank you for all that you do.
Thank you. And thank you, Sonya, for doing this. And let's hope that we can feed some of Amma's people.
Absolutely. The links are in the chat box. Let's feed some people who really need it, who are really hungry. And let's make an impact together.
The book, and I hope you can all get access to the book. And my vision is the book's available everywhere. I don't yet know how to do that.
I actually do. I actually do know how to do that. And I put a link in the chat box for people who are based in Australia, who are looking to get the book. And right now I'm putting it in the chat box for everyone in the US who can access the book, and make sure to read it, because it's an extraordinary memoir. It's a wonderful read. And like I said, it was one sitting. I started it and I didn't put it down. So I was glued. So thank you, Ronni. Thank you, everyone. Let's all make an impact on the world. Thank you, everyone. Om Namo Narayana.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Sonya.
All my love. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.